So this is the charcoal workshop of your toolkit. So the charcoal workshop that's actually included in the toolkit is on the big drawer resource. So you can go in there and have a look at the session there, which is purely drawing with a rubber. Now for this one, we're going to be using both. So do check out the other one so that you can use the two and choose between. So I'm going to be doing a portrait. I've got a mirror set up here in my studio that I'm going to be working from. You might like to use an object, or you might like to go for another person that you're drawing from, or a landscape. So it could be lots of things, but it's the same approach and the same technique. So what we're going to do first is we're going to lightly draw the outline. So there's lots of different approaches to portraits, and every artist will say a slightly different approach. Now, my main approach, as always, is to do a really light outline. Now you can see I'm changing it slightly as I go along, because actually I've decided I want the scale slightly bigger as I'm drawing. Now the main thing when you're drawing with tone is to make sure that you get rid of much of the white paper as quickly as possible. So when you've got white paper, it will always be the most distracting thing because it's the lightest thing. So that's why it's really important when you're painting or drawing just to try and block in as much as possible as quickly as possible, so you haven't got that white paper. So I'm just lightly drawing in where my face will be within the composition. So I'm not worrying about proportions or anything. I'm working really instinctively like we did in those observational drawings. Okay, so for the second step, you're going to start shading in the main areas. So it's like in the first step I was saying, we don't want any big white areas of paper showing, so we're going to block in everywhere, but we're going to start comparing to see what's lighter and what's darker in different spaces. So it'll be different for everyone depending where your light source is coming from, but we're going to start looking to see what's darker. So I can see from where I'm stood here that it is actually darker behind me when I look in the mirror than my face, and then my shoulder is darker than my neck. My shoulder is also darker than what's behind me here. So I'm just making sure I've got rid of all of the white paper. And actually in the big drawer sessions, the first thing you do is cover the whole of the paper, and in the toolkit you'll see it's the same. You cover the whole thing in charcoal because it's a great way to start, because it gives you a completely kind of sculptural canvas that you can work into, which is quite nice. I'm also using the side of my charcoal to draw in with. And I'm just going to put a little bit on the face. Oh. So what I'm going to start doing now is I'm going to start applying a bit more pressure where I just want a bit more definition. So I've drawn out the main shape of the face, and I'm now going to start sculpting out the other key bits of information I can see. So I'm just drawing into the face shape here, and actually I've made those shoulders a bit too high, so I'm just going to rub them back. And that's the great thing about charcoal, is that it is actually really sculptural. So I'm just starting to put in the main elements of what's in front of me, but keeping it really fluid. So, and it's mainly just to get rid of those light areas. Now what I'm doing here is I'm just starting to decide where the nose is going to sit on the paper and where that first eye is going to be. Now lots of people have different ways of drawing faces. Some people have set ways of halfway up, then you divide the face up in a very set way, but actually that can be quite limiting to actually really observing what's in front of you, because obviously your face, unless you're really straight on, is going to have different distortions with the angles and things. So my approach to drawing a portrait is to keep it very flexible, because it's going to change as you're drawing. So I think the best way to do it is to always start with an eye, and then you can measure everything from that one eye. So I'm just generally marking where that eye is going to be. So I'm stood at just a slight angle here, so I'm just popping it in there, and I think the mouth will be about there, and I'm going to pop the other eye in around here. And as I said, I'm at a slight angle, and the reason I can see I'm at a slight angle is because I can just see the side of my head and my hair and my ear at just slightly different angle than if I was straight on. I wouldn't be able to see that information. And then again, I'm just keep changing this area here just to provide that movement. So when you're drawing a face, once you've got that initial measurement in that you can then measure everything else from, it's great, because then that is your measuring tool. So for me, my measuring tool will always be an eye, because I always start with an eye. So what I do is that I then know that it's 2.5 heights of my eye down to the bottom of my nose. So I take my drawing tool and I take my eye height of my drawing and I go 1, 2, and a little bit, and then I know that's the bottom of my nose. So whatever eye you've drawn in, you use that as your measuring tool. So you get the height, so I'm going from the top of my eyelid to the bottom of my eyelid there, and then I'm starting from the bottom of my eyelid that I've drawn. I'm going 1, 2.5, and it's about here. I then know that it's about an eye's height between the bottom of my nose and the top of my lip. So I'm going to again take my eye measurement that's here, and I'm going to go underneath my nose. So actually I've drawn my mouth in about where I should have done. We've also got about an eye's width in between our eyes. So now that I've got this sort of very vague drawing of an eye, I'm going to use that to measure my other eye. So I've taken the end of my drawing tool and I've popped my finger on where my eye stops, and I'm using that as my marker. So I'm then going to use just those basic measurements to help me draw in the rest. So now that I know that I was right where I marked things out, I'm then going to start working back in and over. So again, these will change as you're working and drawing. Things will move and change, and that's why it's good to have your rubber to hand, because you can use that to mark in and to redraw. So I'm just going to keep reworking that face. I've got my eye there. So this second step is really about kind of keeping things nice and flexible. You've decided where things are, but they can move. They don't have to be set in stone, because actually, if you've got the eye or the nose or an angle slightly wrong, then it will still be wrong in 2 hours' time. So you're much better off reworking it and changing it, rather than thinking, oh, that's a really good eye, I need to keep that like that. It's much better to keep working into it and keep changing things as you go along. Also, look to see what meets what along the way. So if I look in the mirror, where does the side of my nose meet along the way. And actually it meets the inside of my eye, so I know that's about where my nose should go. Where does the end of my mouth meet in the mirror? Oh, it's about where my pupil is, around there. So I'm going to draw that in, so that's about right there. This face shape isn't quite right. It's a bit, my face is much rounder, so I'm going to keep reworking into there. So for this second step, it's very much about keeping it flexible, keeping it fluid until you've got things in what you think is about the right space. Okay, so this third step is all about getting in that definition. So it's about standing back from your work, because that's really important, particularly when you're drawing from observation, to be standing away from your work. And also if you're working on a large scale, because things can look very different when they're really close up. And if you take a step back, you can actually see the whole picture. So how one small thing can relate to everything else. So it's very important to step away from your work. Also, if something's not going quite right, take a step back so that you can come back to it a little bit fresher, because sometimes we get quite caught up on one thing that's maybe not going right. And actually, if you draw something around it or near it, it can sometimes solve the problem. So it's good to kind of keep things nice and energized. So for this third step, I'm going to be working in and sharpening things that I've already drawn in. So I'm going to start really giving these eyes a bit more definition. I've got quite prominent eyebrows, quite dark, so I'm going to start popping those in so that they will help with the direction of my face. I'm just going to measure to see where the side of my nose meets, and it actually just meets the inside of my eye there. So it's really important when you're doing portraits to be drawing what is actually in front of you, rather than thinking, oh, that's not what an eye looks like. To really draw what an eye is actually doing in front of you, because particularly with people, things can be quite distorted and can change quite a lot. So actually what a nose looks like is quite different to what it looks like in your mind, or what you think it should look like. And how do I know that that's a nostril? I know because what's around it is slightly darker. I can't see both nostrils, so don't just draw what you think a nose should look like. So I'm just really using this third step to be giving lots of definition, so I can check those angles and I can just double check those proportions. So it's all about adding in that contrast at this point. So really look to see what's darker, what's lighter, and how you know that information. So I'm going to carry on just working in with my rubber and really adding in those lights and darks. While I'm looking to see what's the darkest area, and that's what will help provide form. So particularly if you're drawing somebody you know, or yourself, quite often what you think you look like is probably quite different to what you look like. So don't come into this with a set idea of how it should look. See this very much as you did when you were drawing your objects or drawing a landscape. Whenever I teach portraiture or life drawing or anything like that where it involves the human form, I always say to pretend you're drawing a landscape, because actually it can take away the pressure of something looking like what you think a human form should look like. So to refine my charcoal drawing, I'm working in with a rubber that's also been cut down, so I've got a slightly sharper edge to work in and just get a little bit more definition and detail. And I'm just standing back and making sure that angles are right, so I'm checking angles, I'm holding out my charcoal to just double check angles, what meets what along the way. So if I hold my charcoal up to my nose, what does it meet along the way? Does it meet, what part of my mouth does it meet? What part of my eye does it meet? So physically check those angles, because quite often that can be really deceptive, particularly in portraits, with where you think a cheekbone should be or where you think the side of the face should be. And also it moves as you're drawing. So as you're drawing, your face is moving around. So things will change, your position will change as time goes on. So make sure that you're keeping your drawing as flexible as possible for as long as possible. So the brilliant thing about charcoal is that it is really sculptural. So you can move it, you can change it as you go along. Things don't have to be a set way. You can keep changing things and things will evolve as you work into it. Another really important point, particularly with self-portraits, is that you can often look quite serious. So it isn't always a kind of a realistic depiction of you, but it's real for you in that moment of time. So whatever it is that you're observing, so whether it is a face or an object, trying to really focus on the drawing rather than making something look realistic, because drawing's about capturing a moment of time and photography captures realism. Drawing, it's very much about the other things that are involved. So the time of day, the feelings, the atmosphere, the sounds, all of those things, not just making something look photographic or representational. It's about capturing that moment in time, which charcoal is absolutely brilliant for, because it allows you to work quickly, it allows you to change things, and it allows you to layer things. So really use the rubber to create that high kind of defined contrast, and keep working over and over and into it, and keep standing back, checking those angles and those proportions, and keep checking those lights and darks against each other. So the artists that I've suggested here are Leon Kossoff, who works in a very, very sculptural way. So his drawings are very much kind of relevant to also landscapes. So it's about that constant involvement of mark making, and really using the removal of the charcoal and the material as much as the application, which is how we're approaching our charcoal drawing. So his are really, really layered, and they really capture that sort of sense of time and atmosphere, and how the figure it's not just about representational shapes and forms, it's about an energy and an atmosphere, which the charcoal really, really allows you to do. Another really good artist to look at, as well as Leon Kossoff, is Frank Auerbach, who's very similar in the way that he uses charcoal as a sculptural approach. Now, the second artist I've suggested is Giacometti, because Giacometti, although we quite often think of him as a sculptor, he has done some fantastic drawings that have that same sense of atmosphere as his sculptures. Now, his drawings are really, really sculptural, and again, they capture this kind of sense of time and movement, and this real kind of sense of presence as well. Now, the third artist I've suggested is David Nash, who he works in a real kind of wide range of materials. So he doesn't sort of limit himself to one set way of working, but he does create these really dramatic sculptures. Now, his drawings I find really interesting because they accompany his sculptures, and they're about a sense of space and a sense of place. and they're also about drama and interaction between people, spaces, architecture. So here's another artist who's really worth looking at. So a way to develop and extend this activity is to actually use your charcoal drawing to draw from. So you could keep it as another drawing. You might like to translate it into paint, but it's a really interesting approach to go from something that's really, really observational into something that's actually about the drawing itself. So you're just focusing on, if you were to translate it into paint, you're just focusing on those charcoal marks and how they would translate into paint and into texture. So that's one option, is that you could use your drawing to draw from to make into a painting. Or you might like to take something like wire and actually use all the marks and the lines that you can see within your drawing and the charcoal to actually reinterpret with wire. So again, look at the artist Giacometti, because he works in sort of similar approaches, and that could be a really exciting outcome, is to translate the 2D into a 3-dimensional form.